Hey, I'm Pastor Rhonda.
And I'm Pastor Seth,
You're listening to Growing Hope.
Living Faith.
Welcome back to Growing Hope, Living Faith. My goodness, welcome back.
Yes.
It's been
Welcome.
a few weeks.
Welcome back for everybody. Welcome back for us, for sure. And been a lot going on in life for you and for me. And so we've missed out on a couple weeks. And I tell you what, I definitely miss recording and having these conversations on a very, very deep level. So I'm glad that we are back this week. I know we've got a crazy rush to the end of the year. So I don't know if we're going to be able to record every week from here on out to the end of the year, but we'll definitely try to record as much as we can.
Yes, it's been so busy for us. I went to Write About Jesus in Nashville, and the week before that, I was in Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge for the National Quartet Convention, and then I started a new class at Trevecca, and my goodness, I have finished all of my ministry classes, but now I'm down to 2 stray general ed classes that I've got to complete.
I know, those are the hardest to get done.
I know, because it's been so long since I've had a science class, and I started the science class 3 weeks ago, I think. And oh my goodness, I'm having to do like these little labs where I had to put a balloon over a water bottle that had yeast and sugar, and then I have tests every week, and somehow I have an A in this class, and I don't like. There's just so many terms I don't even know, but overall, I've been sometimes in tears at the complexity of life. I guess I just realized how much I've taken for granted. I don't think about what's happening in this circular respiration, when my lungs are breathing, or how my cells are just dividing and dying and doing what they do. And it's really life. It's really a miracle that we take for granted. And even like we had to learn about chlorophyll and chloroplast, all these words, I'm looking out my window and I see my green trees, but I won't look at that the same just because I know it is such a complex detail of how God has created, and it's made me appreciate life, just our earth that he gave us. And I want to take better care of it. And, we talk about global warming, and there's so many people that think that it's not even real.
Right.
And I don't want to open up a can of worms, but it was really interesting to study that and what's happening and how our climate has changed and what can we do. I learned that the U.S. is like the biggest contributor to this problem, and it all comes back to what can we do as individuals. And in the spiritual realm of things, it's just an appreciation of this beautiful earth that God's given us, and I want to do my part. But one thing the book suggested was to walk 10 miles every day instead of like taking your car to run to the store. I was like, I don't know about that.
That would be tough. Yeah, it would be tough to have to walk everywhere. So, there's been so much that has happened these last 3 or 4 weeks in the world that we live in, especially here in America, on a deep level with Helene coming through and Milton coming through. For us, that's been one of the things. I have in-laws. My in-laws live in Florida. And, with Milton that came through, they came up here, which was very good. I was glad that they came up here. So, we've been dealing with some of that kind of stuff. Thankfully, their place was spared as far as damage and all that kind of stuff goes, which is thankful. I think he has a shed in the back that kind of lost some siding and stuff off of it, but nothing, obviously terribly, happened for them. There's a lot of people that are really struggling, especially our kind of neighbors to the east, North Carolina. Really, really struggling, I think, on a very deep level. And so, I think it's important that we have these conversations and realize that, things are different. I think there's lots of times patterns and things that we, the earth and things go through, but to say that don't have a contributing factor, I think is kind of a crazy thing to say. And I think we should do our part on a very, very deep level. But then also, you just look at the reality of America right now. After these hurricanes, we have election season upon us, and we're not going to dive into that. Because we might
be there.
There's so much just division on such a deep level. and you turn on the TV or you go to YouTube or Facebook or whatever. Oh gosh. I'm getting a call from Mount Vernon, Georgia. All right, we're going to keep on rolling. Sorry. So we're right now we have my phone. We're doing FaceTime through my phone is how we're conversing back and forth. So that was I received a phone call and I couldn't see Pastor Rhonda, and so but we're just going to keep on going. Because we've already had 2 technical difficulties and we're not shutting down again. But yeah, there's so much division, and you turn on, whatever your avenue for receiving information is. There's just a lot of dread, and there's a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of hurt and fear. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and sometimes it's hard to know what is true, what's not true. And it's so easy to allow that, I think, to affect just your overall life. And I think that's what place where a lot of people are at, is a lot of people are just in this place of like, ugh. I've been there over these last 3 weeks of, it's just a struggle. And I think it's important that we remember what truth is. We know the truth. We know who the truth is. And we continuously, stay plugged into that, which is hard, when life hits and struggle hits and you're listening to people around you. And sometimes, there's even pastors and there's religious leaders who pour into that division and the struggle.
Yes,
and, when people are pouring into that, it's really hard, like I said, to know which way is up sometimes and which way is down. And struggling is something that none of us wants to deal with. But it's just so prevalent in everything that we're doing right now. The struggle really is real, which I think, really just kind of points to the passage that we're going to be looking at today on such a deep level. And maybe more than ever, this passage is so timely, I think, for us as the people of God, for us as, just who God's called us to be.
Right, because no one wants to suffer. And I think this is what it's about. And even when we haven't even discussed the other lectionary passages, but Isaiah passage this week is about the suffering of Christ. And then there's the Psalm 91 of, making the Lord your refuge when we're going through times of suffering. And so the passage we're going to look at today is the Job passage. And when I hear the name Job, you just almost shudder. It's like, how much can a person take? You get to the place of not being able to take anything else. And so he, according to, if you read the whole book, you'd have to read all the suffering that he went through. But by the time we get to chapter 38, there's a little twist and a little change. And I don't know how your Bible says, but the heading says God challenges Job. So we have some, we've had some characters already on the scene. We've got Job and his 3 friends, and there's a little bit of the wife saying, curse God and die. And so there's characters, but now there's a twist in the story. There's a transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think how you view God really, I think is very important in how you read the book of Job. If you view God as, once again, this person who's kind of up there pulling the strings, he makes things happen, he causes things to happen, he does all of these things, then I think you're going to read the book of Job and even read this passage, in a certain way, to whereas like if you tend to believe that God is in life, he's, journeying with us, he's in the struggle with us, then I think you can potentially view this passage, in another way. And so, I'm not going to say that there's one right way or one wrong way to be able to view this scripture. I think if you look at the book of Job as a whole, and you read what scholars and theologians have kind of said in the past about this book, or what, just thoughts on this book. And I mean, it's all over the board on such a deep level. Because lots of times we don't know what to do with this book. I will say that the Jewish tradition isn't the only tradition that has a Job story. There's a lot of other faith traditions around this time that they would have had Job stories, which is very, very common for the people of God. We've always been really good, I think, at stealing, different religions, ideas, or thoughts, and then kind of putting our twist and our spin on it. And so, I think you've just got to look at the reality of the book as a whole. What is it really trying to tell us? And then you take that and you try to say, all right, now how do I begin to apply this to my life? Like I said, I don't think it really matters if you were to say, there's some people that say that Job wasn't real. This is just a myth. I mean, there's other people who say, no, Job has to be real. And I said, I don't think either one is wrong, per se. But I think what we should be looking at for this book is, what does this tell us about God? What does this tell us about the nature of God? And how can we take who God is and what we see in the nature of God, and how can we apply that to our life to make sure that we are living the life that God's called us to live? And then even more so, when we are struggling, what does this book tell us about God, the nature of God, the character of God? Because the struggle is real for everyone. The struggle is obvious for everyone. And so suffering is, yeah. And so what do we do in those moments?
Right. Well, you want me to jump into it?
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay, it's Job chapter 38, 1 through 7, and then we're going to jump down to 34 through 41. And I do not have my contacts in, so right. I may stumble here. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings so that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to number the clouds? Or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens, when the dust runs into a mass and the clods cling together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food?
Yeah, the twist, right? The twist. We all, I think, pretty much know the story pretty well. Obviously a lot of bad things happen to Job. There's this, this opening kind of chapters are this, I guess, conversation in heaven between, God and this under figure. And obviously bad things happen to Job. Everything gets taken away. It's not just that everything gets taken away. Obviously, he has boils on his body and all this kind of stuff. I mean, so it's just physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. I mean, just everything. And so then he goes into this morning and his friends come. Well, his wife first says, hey, why don't you just curse God and die? And she leaves. Then his friends come and they're trying to have all these conversations with him, trying to encourage him, which I think lots of times happens in the struggle, at least for us as Christians, where we try to encourage people. And so we say things that we probably shouldn't say on a very deep level, like, oh, well, everything happens for a reason, or, you know what, God's in control. And so all this is, and so I think a lot of times we say a lot of these things because we're just trying to make it easier upon ourselves instead of actually getting into the struggle with people. But they're trying to help him out. And then eventually Job goes directly to God and really begins to question God and why these things really happened. And then this is essentially where God comes back and says, whoa, 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 whoa. And, I want to be very, very careful because I don't want to turn this into something to the reality of like, we can't necessarily have questions for God. because I
Right.
believe that God desires, relationship is this openness. It is this reality of being able to converse back and forth. It's the ability to be able to ask questions and to challenge each other. Obviously, as God challenges Job here, I think that that's important within relationship. And so I want to make sure that we're just very, very careful, not that we lead people to a place where they say, oh, well, we can't question God or we can't have conversation with God, because I don't think that's what this story is really trying to say.
Because he knows our thoughts anyway, and he knows what we're thinking, and he knows our doubts. And there's a difference between like a sarcasm, like not believing, as just really seriously wanting to know answers and trying to understand. Again, he was suffering,
right.
He was ready for it to come to an end, and he couldn't understand what he had done wrong. And that's why his friends were trying to point out that it was some act of unrighteousness on his part that he brought all this on himself. So that was like an added thing to his suffering, this guilt that was placed on him too.
Right.
But I remember the first time that I read chapter 38 in Job, it was like, it kind of took my breath away, because I was like, wow, I've never thought about about all these things, about the morning stars singing together, and, about where lightning, who sends the lightning back and forth. And it just gave me a sense of awe of like the sovereignty or the power, I guess, of God more than anything. Like, my goodness, he really is mighty and powerful. And I felt so small when I read that, but I don't think that God would ever want us to feel like we can't approach him,
right.
And that we can't, because we see that in the life of Jesus, and we see that in the story that you're going to be preaching this Sunday.
Yeah.
The other passage, the other lectionary passage, the gospel one, Jesus is still approachable. And so, God calls Job out, gird your loins, take it like a man. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't want anybody to think that God is not approachable with our sincere questions and our sincere thoughts.
Yeah, 100%. And I've always, really tried to encourage people, like, you're in the struggle, like, I think it's okay sometimes to be mad. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think God can handle a lot of that as well. And so,
right.
I would never, I think God, like I said, that's relationship, is being true and honest. And I think God can handle the reality of those situations. But I don't think God's desire for his people is for us to stay there.
Right.
It's so easy to stay in those states of mind, to stay in that reality, instead of realizing and coming to a place of growth and pushing forward. It's easier sometimes to wallow in our self-pity, in our sadness, in our mourning, in our all of those things. And like I said, I'm not saying that those things are bad, but sometimes we allow life to totally pass us up because we're living in the past, and we're living in all of these things that have happened to us, whenever the reality is there's life to live. And when we choose not to live life, even though we've had a hard struggle and a hard past, like, we choose not to live life, we're not just letting ourselves down, but there's other people around us that we're letting down as well. And so, I think that that's God's desire, and that's God's nature. Is not that, like, he doesn't say that struggle is not going to happen, but it's not that we stay in the struggle, but that we somehow figure out the reality of who he is and what he is, and realize that he is much bigger than the struggle, and that his fingerprints are everywhere. I mean, they're absolutely everywhere. And I think that that's the reality. Like, it says that he speaks to Job out of the whirlwind. And once again, at the end of it all, he says, who are you really to question me? And who are you to question the reality of the life that I give? And so he tells him, gird your loins up, man. This is getting ready to get tough. Like, this is getting ready to get difficult. It's time for you to be a man. You've been questioning me over and over and over and over and over again. And I understand the struggle's real. I understand you don't like where you're at. I understand that you've lost everything. You think you've lost everything. You think everything's for naught. I understand you think you're ready to die and just be done. But man, it's time to gird it up. It's time for me to question you. And it's time for me to really show you the reality of who I am and my goodness that I have bestowed upon all of humanity as a whole.
Wow. And that's true. And then we have the benefit of knowing the end of the story.
Right.
That, that God, he expressed all this, he challenged Job, but at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, he blessed Job and gave him back more than he ever had. And it just reminds me that it doesn't matter like what kind of suffering that we go through, because I think people struggle with, well, why doesn't God heal me, or why doesn't God deliver me out of this mess? It didn't change, but it's a timing thing, because he's always going to deliver. He's always going to heal. It may not be in your time frame. It may not be, as people, the old timers would say, this side of eternity. But it's true. He will take away the suffering at some point. In Job's story, he was restored on earth, in this story, and God blessed him. But sometimes if you read like in Hebrews, you have your people that were sawed in half, that they never saw the fruition of their faith. So I think it's important too that we can't always just nail God and not hold him to an expectation that he's going to restore everything that I lost. This, he may not. And that's just a big mystery of how do we know? We ask for it. Of course, we're going to ask for it. But again, sometimes God does not restore faithful individuals. And, we see that in scripture as well. But in the story, he does. So, again, I think for me, it was just this awe of that he's powerful, that, he knows what he's doing. And if he can call forth lightning, if he can feed ravens, and if he can do he's going to take care of me, and he's always going to ensure that my soul stays intact, whether my body or whether I lose, and but my soul will always be intact. And sometimes he might restore now, sometimes it might be later, but I can always count on him to care for my soul. And that's not really in this passage, but I think if you go back to the Psalm 91 passage, of the suffering and all this is happening, and it looks as if like you're going to be protected from anything that could ever possibly go wrong. And I think people use that Psalm 91 into saying, but as we see, Job is a very righteous man, and everything still fell apart in his life. We can't claim Psalm 91 and say nothing is going to ever happen that's horrible. But we can always know that he's powerful, and that he is still in control, and that he's going to not ever leave us. Like you said earlier, he's not going to leave us in the middle of all that. He's always going to protect our soul. Yeah.
And I think our posture makes a big difference on a very deep level. So many times, and I think it's us in the Western world, we're really, really guilty of this. Is we feel like we're owed something. We feel like, once again, we have a right to something. We feel like we have an entitled, right? We're entitled to something. I think the beauty of this passage is we really learn, once again, the nature and character of God, to where God says, life is enough. Like, look around at the reality of what I have given you. Like, I have given you the beauty of earth. Like I've given like rain, I've given food, I've given you all of these things. And so many times when we struggle, we get so hyper focused on the reality of the situations and circumstances that we're going through, that if we were just to try to somehow come out from that just a little bit, you would actually see the realities of the goodness of God all around us.
Right.
And instead of really being hyper-focused on all of the struggle and the things that are going on right here in front of us, and thinking that God owes us something, because here's the reality. God owes you nothing. Like nothing. And we get so worked up and we get so caught up in this reality of thinking that God owes us something, and that God owes us wealth, and he owes us health, and he owes us all of these things. And the reality is that stuff sells to people. And so that's why a lot of preachers, they preach that stuff, because because people they respond to that and they give money to that and they do all of these things. But like, God owes us nothing. God has given us, just by simply giving us life, has given us such a beautiful and precious gift, that he owes us nothing. And and this is what I love about this passage. I feel like God's just saying, like, look around, dude. Like, just look around at the reality of my goodness. My fingerprints are everywhere. They're everywhere. And instead of being so hyper focused, like, just look at the reality, because like you were talking about earlier with your science class, there are so many moving parts in the reality of the world and how the world works. And there are people who say, hey, like, obviously this wasn't created by God. You know, we would take a science class. We say, man, there's no way that this could not have been thought of, or had it not created by some divine power, some divine being. And so he's saying, listen, all of this works together. I did all of this for you. Like, so don't get so hyper focused on your problems, on your struggle, which is really, really hard to do, but realize that there is a bigger work going on. And if you really just try to somehow pan out and look at the reality of what's going on around you, look at creation itself, look how good I have been to you, look how I take care of lions and I take care of the animals, and like, just look at all of that reality, and you will realize that yes, sometimes life does stink and there is a struggle and people make choices, because that's the kind of God I am, that I give people the ability to be able to make choices. Your wife chose to leave you because she had that choice whether or not she was going to do that. And so I give people choices, and there's consequences to all of those choices that we essentially have to make. And I'm going to allow those consequences sometimes to play out. I'm not up here pulling the strings. I'm going to allow that to happen. But listen, I have given you so much. Just look at the reality. And so you can sit here and you can be mad at me and you can curse me and you can say, you can't believe I've done what I have done. But man, you're just so hyper focused on this. You're not even seeing the reality. Life is passing you by because you're so hyper focused on this, and you're not living the life that I desire for you to be able to live, because the reality is God owes us nothing.
Makes me think of a song my friend Phil Cross wrote. Something about you owe me. It's not you one. Something about you don't owe me one thing, I think is the name of it. But it's true. I mean, he doesn't owe us anything. And like you said, even going back to my science class, it's really interesting how God works, like orchestrates all these details about, you know, when I would be in this class. But I was at a birthday party for a friend, and it's held at some science museum. It's a Christian science museum, but we were invited to go up to the planetarium, and we were in these theater seats, and we laid back, and it was like the whole screen above us just open, and just these pictures of stars and the planets, and you know, it was pictures taken from the Hubble spaceship or whatever it's called. And I don't know, it's just amazing that I was laying there just feeling so guilty, thinking, you know, I walk outside, I don't even look up. And there's this majesty. I've got friends that posted this week of the comet that, you know, that you could see, and we don't even pay attention. We don't even pay attention to the flowers. We don't pay attention. We're always too busy going from point A to point B, or like you said, we're focused on the things that are going wrong instead of looking at all he's given us. We don't even think about the next breath. We don't think about our heart pumping blood. We don't think about all the things. Even, you know, and I know some people do struggle with having a baby, but just, you know, sometimes it's like, I didn't have, that wasn't my struggle. And, you know, and I'm in this class and I'm learning like all the details of what's going to happen to, you know, to produce a child. And I'm going, I had no idea all this was taking place, you know? And it's the same thing. You just look at your body and you think about the blood that's just circulating, and, you know, how it has this ability to heal itself. And again, you can look out your, like, you know, window and just see all the beauty. We miss it. We miss the glory, I think, on a regular basis. And, you know, again, we take it for granted.
Yep. On such a deep level. And like, it's just such a fascinating passage because there's so many. I feel like there's so many other realities and rabbit holes we can go down. But like even how he ends it, like, can you hunt the prey of the lion or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? And it's like, well, think about that. The lion is hungry, right? But what has to happen to the antelope in order for the lion to be fed? It's got to die.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's got to die. And it's the same thing for the raven. Who provides for the raven its prey? Like, if the young ravens are going to, well, that stinks for the antelope, right? That stinks for whatever the ravens have to eat. And so, like, it's this cycle. It's the reality of life that, like, it doesn't matter if you're the prey or if you're the hunted. Like, it doesn't matter. The reality is we all go through moments of struggle. And the question is how are we going to position ourselves? And I think that the beauty of the reality of the kingdom of God and the gospel is that even when we go through struggle, we can still be content in the reality of where God has us and the things that life maybe has brought our way. And the only way we can do that is if we truly have this understanding, once again, of who God is, of who we are, and the reality of the goodness of God in the midst of all situations and all circumstances. And that's hard to get to that place. It really, really is hard. And believe me, like, I've been struggling, these last several weeks with even coming to that place. And I think that's why I really wanted to talk about this passage, because I think it talks to the heart of the situation. I feel like where we're at, but even just looking around the situation, not saying that, okay, struggle is going to happen, and so we don't need to help people who are struggling. No, I think this all that much more ever says, man, if you're struggling, help other people who are struggling, because there's something to that reality of our response. What's going to be our response? Are we going to sulk and sit in our response for the rest of our lives and say, man, I only think about what could have been? Or are we going to realize that the God of the universe is good? And even though bad things happen, it doesn't mean that he's bad. It means that he is still working. He's still moving. And I'm going to choose to live life here and now that God has for me, instead of wallowing in the reality of all of this struggle and suffering and pain that I may be experiencing right here and right now.
Yeah, and we just have to position ourselves to step out of it, and to look up and to look out and to get outside, and look at other people. My mom would be the first to tell you, when she is struggling physically, and she'll say, well, there's always somebody else that's in a worse position than I am. And that's so true. Like you mentioned, like the food chain thing going on. But it is true. But I think it has to do with our perspective. And then I think Job's response, and it might be a lectionary passage in the future, but his response is so appropriate. Like, I said things I had no idea what I was saying, and I think that's probably that ties into the gospel passage this week, where Jesus says, you have no idea what you're asking when you're asking to sit my right and my left. I think once we understand, with knowledge comes responsibility, and we have to, say, okay, now that I know better, I can do better. And
so good.
This was good. This was a good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's a conversation I needed, and hopefully you needed it. And I think that's the question you can take into life. Man, what are you going to do? What's going to be your posture? What's going to be your response in the midst of the struggle? Is it going to dictate how you live life and the life that you do live? Or are you going to realize who God is and the goodness of God? Even if everything's not going the way you want it to go, or even if everything's not going your way, God is still good, and God is still faithful, and he is still journeying with us. And if we choose to, we can continue to live life abundantly, even in the midst of the struggle. And so that's a great question for you. What are you going to do? What's going to be your response? What's going to be your posture? So know that we love you. Know that we're praying for you in the midst of this conversation that you're having, and hopefully that you're continuing to have with people that you love and care about. And man, know if you're in the struggle, you're not alone. And if there's anything you need, or have prayer requests or concerns or comments or whatever, we'd love to hear from you. We do have an email. It's growinghopelivingfaith@gmail.com.
And we have a Facebook page. It's Growing Hope Living Faith Podcast. And we would love to hear from you. And as you were getting ready to wrap up, I couldn't help but think about, I think it's the Joshua verse that says, be strong and take courage, that wherever you go, whatever you face, He is going to be right there with you.
That's right.
And that's amazing. His presence is all we need.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Such a great way to wrap all that up. Man, know that we love you. We're praying for you. And we pray and hope that you have a great Sunday and a great week next week. You might hear from us next week. You might not, but we'll see what happens.
See.
So
next week might be a pretty good week for me. So.
So we'll see. All right. Grace and peace. God bless. We love you all. Bye-bye.